Welcome to another virtual Live Talks Los Angeles event. We welcome Gabriel Byrne to our series and welcome back Colm Tóibín. We invite you to visit our YouTube channel for over 300 conversations much like this. Follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. Our handle is Live Talks LA. Gabriel Byrne's new memoir is Walking with Ghosts. Byrne was born in Dublin and has starred in over 80 films for some of cinema's leading directors. He won a Golden Globe for his performance on HBO's In Treatment. On Broadway, he won the Outer Critics Circle Award for Best Actor and has been nominated twice for the Tony Award. Colm Tóibín is the author of 9 novels, including The Master and Brooklyn, and 2 collections of stories. His play, The Testament of Mary, was nominated for a Tony Award for Best Play. His work has been translated into more than 30 languages. I am Ted Haptegaber, founder and producer of the series, and towards the end, I will pose some questions from our audience for Gabriel. I'll let you take it from here, Colm.
Gabriel, it's really wonderful to talk to you. This is an absolutely marvelous book. It's a very original book in Irish terms because in Irish memoir writers usually write a memoir in order to blame their parents for their entire background and blame Ireland and blame everybody.
Yeah.
And you don't do that. It's refreshing. It's also beautifully written. It's poetic, and it's a really riveting read in many ways, just because of the levels of introspection as well. What I noticed first in the book is that you don't do it chronologically. You don't go A, B, C, D, E, this happened next and next and next, and then you do it as a mosaic. You place things beside each other that are not beside each other in time, but are beside each other in your memory. I was wondering if you could talk to us about constructing the book.
Well, I think that it was an effort to replicate what I thought the way memory actually works, in that it constantly flashes from present to past, much in the same way that sometimes a movie is constructed. And it wasn't so much that I was trying to place things chronologically. I was trying to see the links between events and how the past affected the kind of person I am now. So rather than do it as a chronological kind of autobiography, in the sense that, I did this and I did that, I wasn't so much interested in that as trying to find the places in my life that had a changing effect on me, and how to hone in on that, and how to mark that with the present. For example, I did juxtapose my first communion story, getting my clothes for my first communion, a deep sense of shame that I had about the secondhand clothes that we had to wear. And juxtaposing that with getting Gianni Versace, who was designing a suit for me, not because I wanted to mention Gianni Versace or name drop in any way, but it just seemed to sum up for me that memory of shame with arriving at this place, which would have seemed to me impossible to arrive at many, many years ago.
Part of the book is a sort of poetic journey into a Dublin that has disappeared, that you walk, or you walk through, or you imagine your way through streets, scenes, landscapes that have just disappeared, and the only way you get them back really is by writing them down. And there's an evocative sense in the book that not exactly nostalgic, but simply the need to recover things that have gone.
Yes, I think that landscapes can also be a form of haunting, or they can be ghost-like, in the sense that what you come back looking for isn't so much the building itself as one's own past. And you realize that the past is gone, but that the buildings themselves, the doorways, the pubs, the streets, are embedded somewhere in the memory of of consciousness. And I found the same thing when I was in New York. I had been there before 9/11, and being there afterwards, I found that the Twin Towers haunted that city in a way to anybody who had lived there beforehand. And it was the idea, the beginning the book, as a panorama looking across the literal landscape of where I had spent my time as a child, and seeing that it was irrevocably gone, and that, as I said in the book, I felt like an intruder in my own past. Memory is unreliable, of course. I think it was William Maxwell who said we lie when we try to recapture things through memory. We lie with every breath we take, and I think that I was very much aware of that as I was writing it. And maybe you have a thought about this, but I think that in memoir, as opposed to, say, writing a novel, with a novel, you have a freedom to invent characters, situations, landscapes. Whereas with the memoir, if you're going to be honest about it, you're forced, to reckon with the truth and to say, is this the way it was? How do I excavate this so that it doesn't seem too nostalgic, too sentimental, too funny? Because sometimes I notice I'll notice in writing, somebody just goes too far, and you say, no, you're doing that for effect. It's kind of, you want to be funny, or you want to be more, you want to be more than the actual moment is. So capturing the moment through memory was very much about image and landscape. To me, it began always with images, and then there's an exercise in acting which I've never actually used except once, and it's a Stanislavski exercise. And I first came across it at the studio, the Focus Theatre in Dublin, which is a very small theatre, an amazing little place that put on great classic plays to audiences of 20 and 30. Led by an amazing woman who had studied with at Stanislavski's studio in New York. Well, the idea behind the exercise is sense memory. So the first play I was doing there was Rosmer's Home by Ibsen. And of course, 19th century Norway was not somewhere, obviously, I was familiar with. But the idea behind the sense memory exercise is that you try to recreate in one's imagination the sights, the sounds, the smells, the feelings that you imagine that character might feel. And I started with that concept, like, what was the landscape like? What were the images that I remember? And how do I try to truthfully represent that? Like, I was trying to describe the change of seasons there, and I didn't want to write a big lyrical seasons of mists and mellow fruitfulness kind of piece about the seasons. I only wanted to record what I noticed, and that's all. So I was confronted on each page with what was that street like? What was that? What was the feeling in the town? What are the things that the sensual, the sense things that I remember? And out of that, I I I was determined not to be nostalgic or sentimental or too funny, to strain for effect. There's a thing in Catholicism, I think, which I used to be a member of the Catholic Church, but they have a thing in there called the examination of conscience. And it's a way of looking at oneself and being totally honest about what one has done, from one confession to the next. And I try to use that as well to really look at myself, warts and all.
I think that for any Irish male, especially, the whole business of Catholic ritual, of how much you believed, or how much you were taken in by the smells, not just by the smells though, but by the entire vision of the world and of the afterworld. And I think this is one of the marvelous things in your book, where you take it seriously. You describe what it was like, not just as something that you rejected, but it's something that took you over to the extent that you went to England to become a priest. Could you just describe that idea of the faith, first of all, but secondly, the experience of then leaving home at a very young age, and your parents accepting this and going to a foreign country, but going to then with faith, with an idea of a vocation?
Well, for me, religion was very much about, it was very much like a fairy tale, in the sense that I really truly believed. Religion solved a great many of the fears that I had. It answered a lot of, even as a boy, complex questions that I didn't quite understand. The idea of death and time and so forth, that were just on the edges of boyhood consciousness. And there was a tremendous comfort in a boyhood that wasn't particularly happy or rosy, in escaping into this world of imagination. And the Catholic Church is brilliant at creating a sensual world. For example, the light through stained glass produces an effect that's almost magical, and the smell of incense is known to be soporific, and the constant repetition of plain chant, the standing up, the kneeling down, all these things contribute to a calming of the spirit, and there's a great certainty in ritual. And I took the ritual, as I think we all did, literally and seriously, without any examination of it. And no matter what one thinks about it now, those rituals were in their way truly beautiful. And the first inkling that I had, though I didn't know it at the time, about what it meant to be an actor, because the Catholic Church also understood the importance of theatre, the connection of the leading actor with who was the priest with the congregation, which is the audience, and that I went from this incredibly shy, uh, just terribly insecure, shy child, to walking out in front of a congregation. I don't know why or how I did that, or
You mean as an altar boy?
as an altar boy, and what possessed me to do that. But one of the great things about the Ireland of that time was that there was a certainty. I mean, we look back on it now and we think, well, a certainty about what? Well, life was lived, and you were kind, you were generous, you abided by the rules of the church, you lived a good life, and you went to heaven. And if you didn't live a good life, you went to hell. The thoughts of hell were horrific. And I remember, and I described it in the book, where a teacher one day took a match and took one of the kids from the first row and put him standing in front of the class, and put the lighted match to his finger to show us that hell was a permanent state of physical pain. But worse than the permanent state of physical pain was the deprivation that one had from seeing the face of God. So being a priest was something that was accepted in the culture as something worthwhile, something worth pursuing, because it was the greatest gift that God could give a family, was to give the family a priest. And my parents were very believing, faith-filled people, and this was regarded as a gift from heaven. Now, cynically, I think the way young children were exploited in that way, to leave home at 11 years of age, to go on a boat and a train to cross to a foreign country. I look back on that and I think, even though I didn't understand what was going on, it was a tremendously cynical way of recruiting innocent minds and vulnerable and gullible parents. into parting with their children. And I describe in the book, sorry, Colm, go ahead.
Sorry, Gabriel, go on.
That it was the first time I experienced real loneliness and homesickness and tremendous vulnerability, and at the same time being part of an enormous group of young boys who at 11 and 12 were convinced that they were headed for the missions to save souls for God. Yes, that may have seemed like it was Ireland 1958, but what struck me, or 59, whatever it was, later than that, I think, what struck me was that it wasn't just unique to Ireland, because I've spoken to people who were raised in the Baptist faith in America, and people who were raised in other religions, and the connecting tissue between them is about a Valhalla, a home, a permanent home that one is led to, that this is a veil of suffering, and one was repressed and kept in control by fear and shame and guilt to a great extent.
And within this world of which was idealistic, which was spiritual, and in which you were meant to be protected, in which you were going to be a leader, the idea of abuse, of sexual abuse, really comes as a terrible shock, and it's something that you're almost uneasy about even writing about. You can see how hard it has been for you to go into it, because it's not as though you're saying, I have come out the other side of this. I am a survivor. That you don't feel as sure about that. So it's a very tentative process writing that, isn't it?
It is. And I thought long and hard about writing that, because I understand now at this age that secrecy and silence are enemies to the truth. And I thought, if I'm going to write this, I again better be truthful about it. But I don't want to come at it from the point of view, this happened and I survived, and there's a kind of a thing in the culture that we live in where you confront the obstacle, you overcome it, you find what they call closure, and you move on. That's the kind of formula. Well, what I find is that in confronting it, there isn't necessarily closure, and there isn't resolution. And that sometimes you can't just move on from it. You have to accept that it happened, but that you have to accept that it may never be resolved. In an effort to resolve it, some years ago, I contacted the priest. And what shocked me was how gentle his voice still was at 87 or 88 years of age. And that he didn't remember me, but of course I remembered him vividly. What I wanted to write about in the first part of the account was something that I've never actually seen before, which is the language of seduction that a predator uses and how they go about the seduction process. Now, he called me to that room to explain the facts of life to me. And so my first introduction to the facts of life was in that particular room. Other and there were children, other men that I've spoken to that went through the same thing, were called for private confession. And because this man was the vicar of Christ, or the authority figure, you just didn't dare question anything. Because this man had spoken. But looking back over it, where I really found it difficult was the excavation process of the language that he used. And I found that I remembered almost everything. And I remember thinking to myself, well, he actually said to me, well, you must have a girl that you miss, which is a strange thing to say to a kid who thinks he's going to be a priest by another priest. You must remember, you must miss a little a girl that you've kissed. or a boy? And he just threw that in. I remember thinking, why would I miss a boy? Is he talking about, the guy who lives out? Like, what's he talking about? But I remember uh, the whole room, the way it was laid out almost for seduction. And I'd never been in a room like that. And it felt warm and it felt comforting, and there was firelight and there was pictures on the wall and books and a comfortable couch and a carpet and all those things that we didn't have. We slept in dormitories of 36 people. But what I discovered after that phone call was, of course, that he didn't remember me. So there was no, like, you did this to me, or I hope you roast in hell, or whatever it was that I wanted to say. And I stayed with that for a bit, and I said, well, what does that connect with the idea of forgiveness or lack of forgiveness? Can you forgive? So I was in New York and I met this couple, and she had survived Auschwitz with her mother. And you don't need to say much more than that, because, we understand what that means. And her husband, and we were in a discussion about forgiveness. And I said to her, do you forgive what happened to you? And she said, yes, I do. Because if I don't, it's just going to eat away at me, and they win. And the husband hit the table, and all the crockery, went flying. And he said, there is no such thing as forgiveness. And there you have it.
Yeah.
There is, and there is, and there isn't.
Yeah. Gabriel, just with this sort of a mosaic of yours, just moving on from, I mean, I remember when you started in Dublin, the Focus Theatre, Deirdre O'Connell, Manic Flynn play, you were a sort of star on the stage in a very small world, but nonetheless, we all went, it was fascinating to watch you then. And you write in the book, it's really funny, about there was a soap opera in Ireland called The Reardons that was set on a farm, and it was coming to an end, and it was replaced by a show called Bracken, which used some of the characters from it. At the end of The Reardons, you appear, and whatever way they film you and whatever way you're performing, you become a sex symbol, but even more when Bracken starts, because Bracken's really about you. And it's directed by Pat O'Connor, as far as I remember. And can you just describe what it was like, this other big change in your life to suddenly become, I mean, really, Gabriel, you were a sex symbol in the Ireland of my youth. And I wonder if you could describe, I mean, what it was like for you.
Well, it's still kind of difficult to understand. One of the things that I was trying to work with in the book was the notion of identity. It seemed to me that the Irish education system was about not constructing a positive identity, but actually deconstructing an identity. And you spent your time in the back desk trying to avoid any kind of notice at all. I think I wanted to be honest about the way I felt about myself inside. I felt ugly. I felt inconsequential. I felt sometimes I was like a shadow. I didn't fit in. I was always trying to figure out, what is it that makes people at ease with each other? Why do I not feel that? Why am I always going red? Why do I feel my nose is too big? Why do I feel like, because one of the things, I'm sure you probably you might relate to this, Colm, is that men's bodies were never talked about. Like, men didn't have bodies. Women had bodies, and women's bodies were the temples of the Holy Ghost. But at the same time, they were sources of temptation. So you had no idea what the hell was going on. So I carried that identity more or less with me until I became an actor, which, in the same instinct that I became an altar boy. I don't know why I found myself being an actor, but I did. And then to be suddenly related to as a totally different person. And I suppose it made me very, very uneasy.
Yeah, I think
Because
it's easy to see that from the book, that you're not that interested in show business or the glamour of the thing. There's a wonderful moment in the book where someone says to you, well, of course, actors are always pretending, and you can see the priest in you saying, no, our job is to tell the truth.
Yes.
And I think in what you're talking about, that idea of acting as a way of investigating the self, and of also your own relationship to conscience, that those Eugene O'Neill roles that you played seem to me, I mean, I've seen them, and it seems to me that something very special in you connected with the language and with the sort of sense of woundedness that's in those plays, Touch of the Poet and Long Day's Journey into Night.
I felt a connection with O'Neill that I didn't really have to examine. I just felt I know what this man is talking about. And my job as an actor is try to channel what he was talking about to an audience. In the same way, I suppose, that one finds one's favorite authors and you gravitate towards them, and they're speaking to a particular part of you that is sometimes you can't articulate. But O'Neill deals with things that I find fascinating. He deals with masks, and he talks about, for example, that we are all haunted by the masks that we wear ourselves and the masks that others wear, and that the big challenge in life is to take off the mask and to reveal oneself as one is. You can't fake O'Neill. You're either bad at it or you approximate something of what he was trying to say, but you can't fake it. So you know that his basically his command to you is rip off that mask and don't be afraid to show who you are. Then you realize something that I believe, though a lot of actors would disagree with me: every performance is inside oneself. There's no such thing. It's impossible to become another person. You can't. You can't be. What you can bring is the raw material that is inside yourself to the character, and you make that character real through your own connection with the truth. And that requires sometimes pushing through fear and embarrassment and lack of courage and so forth. And I wish I could say that there was a tremendous satisfaction in that, but there's not. I prefer stage to cinema because you never have to see a play. You never have to see what you've done. You never have to see the imperfection in what you've tried to do. Whereas with a film, it's there forever, and you're sitting on a couch eating popcorn some night. Something comes on, and you scramble for the remote to change it and say, "Oh, Jesus Christ, not that thing." Not that you're ashamed of it, but because you realize that's not what I meant. The great thing about a play is that you get to do it again and again and again until you approximate some place where you think, I kind of know this, and I know what he was talking about now. And two things happen, interestingly. Sometimes nights you go on the stage and you don't feel the emotion. You just don't feel like doing it. Like some days you don't feel like going into town, you meeting people. You just and you go on stage and something shows up, and the emotions and the language recognize each other. And in a weird way, you stand back and you say, my God, that language is bringing the emotions out of me. And, but you can't sit around, in a pub waiting for the muse to show up. You have to go out there every night on the stage and risk failure, because it's not like in a movie where you can say, cut, let's do that again. You suddenly find, I worked with an actor once, and in act one, he was doing the lines from act three. And I thought, oh my God, how do I get around this? And, we had to, form a little like salvage group around him to get him to go back to act one. he didn't realize that's what was happening. So I think when I recognized in O'Neill certain truths about myself, I realized one of O'Neill's most compelling themes is that love does not save you. Love is not salvation. In Moon for the Misforgotten, Josie loves James Tyrone Jr. to distraction, and she tries to save him with her love, and he walks out of that love to his own destruction. And that's something that I really identify with. And that's what, you keep mining things like that in O'Neill, and the truths keep coming up, and you think, my God, this man was writing about things that we barely acknowledge and we barely understand. And I found the same thing in a great Irish playwright called Tom Murphy, who was maybe the Irish O'Neill, and his work is sadly not universally known. But I think O'Neill is a great tester of an actor.
I think your book makes clear the attraction, in the sense that your own demons are really on display in this book in a way which is very unusual. That you're very raw in the book. There's a particular moment at the Cannes Film Festival that really shocks you in the book, and it's the sort of thing that people often keep to themselves, which makes the book, in other words, it's very soft and poetic at certain moments. You're trying to make sense of a disappeared world, and then other times in the book you move to a section where you're confronting directly demons. Could you just describe the Cannes event, what happened at that time? What film it was, who spoke to you, what the days afterwards were like?
It's a bit like, I suppose, what we were talking about earlier on, about the first kind of success in Ireland, where, and I probably some great therapists could trace this back to some root. I don't actually know, but a producer who shall remain nameless, but who may be being detained at a prison somewhere upstate in New York, said to me, whispered into my ear, after this film was shown at Cannes to a standing 10-minute standing ovation. All I could see was my fellow actors being besieged by people.
It's the usual suspects.
It was the usual suspects, yeah. And although I had done Miller's Crossing, and that critically opened up America for me, in a way, I knew this was going to be success on a mass scale. Now, I thought this was unique to me until a few months ago. I read a piece in the New York Times about people who are confronted with success and have this, essentially, what's a kind of a psychological, some excuse me, some kind of a panic attack. And that's what it was, where my identity was threatened again. And I thought, well, I've just spent this time trying to be this person, and now you're telling me that that doesn't exist anymore. And basically the panic attack, or whatever it was, the confrontation with success, which is what, that was one of the goals of my life, I suppose, was to be successful, not in a movie star way, but just in a way that would open up working opportunities for me, that things that I really, really wanted to do. I fled Cannes. I left in the middle of a press conference. I just said, excuse me, I need to go. And nobody paid any attention. I went downstairs. I got the driver and I took my belongings and I left Cannes. And I went to this hotel in Nice, and I barricaded myself in there for 3 to 4 days. And I'm not proud of it, that I did that. I didn't understand why I was doing it at the time, but there was a sense of, I can only say, some kind of shame. I don't even know if shame is the right word, but again, it goes back to being told you'll never be any good for anything. You're just a stupid person. And I list in the book 14 words that I was called for stupid. And this must have brought something like that up for me. And to flee success when it is handed to you, is something I don't quite understand about myself. Now I have a much clearer idea of what success and failure actually mean. I have learned more in my life from failure than I ever have from success. Success is not anything that changes you. It's not anything that you say, okay, now I'm successful. Now I'm at the top of the mountain and I can hoist the flag and everything's cool and everything's resolved in my life and I'm a very happy person and I'm very wealthy and I'm very successful. N- That doesn't happen. What happens is, like I said before, the you is still in there. Other people around you have changed and they challenge your notion of yourself.
I was pretty shocked in the book by your descriptions
Mhm.
of your own drinking.
First of all, I think the myth of the drinking artist, whether it's John Cheever or Dylan Thomas or Brendan Behan, um, it's a romantic myth that's actually a very dangerous myth, that real creativity and alcohol are go hand in hand. I think I was brought up with that. We were brought up with that in the culture that we imbibed at the time, the notion that it was a great thing to be a drinker and a poet or a writer of some kind. Um, that's not why I became an alcoholic. I became an alcoholic because I am essentially allergic to alcohol. And yet, at the same time, in much the same way that religion and the cinema, going to the cinema as a child, it provided an escape from the isness of life, from the grey reality of Dublin at that time. It was also encouraged. You know, you were a great man if you could drink pints and, you know, you did crazy things. And you wanted to be part of that because of my allergy to it and my desire to escape. I became completely addicted to it. And it had been a great fear of my life, a great fear, because I remembered seeing that man lying in the doorway when I was a kid, looking out of the window of the bus and everybody tut-tutting on the bus as this guy lay there in the morning, uh, half asleep, you know. Well, I didn't realize that that happened to me. The thing that I feared the most happened to me. Um, Fortunately, I pulled myself back from the precipice and realized that I had a choice. I had a choice whether I was going to live or die. And I'm not saying that there weren't great times when I was drinking. There were fabulous times, but I eventually had to pay the piper, and I stopped. And I just didn't want any more vomit or blood or broken bones or regrets or blackouts. The reality of that myth of drinking, that's the reality of it. Vomit and broken glass and blood. That is what it's about. And there's only one way, two ways that can end, either in death or in madness. So I stopped, and if I believed in a God, I'd say thank God, but I don't, and I have to say that I intend, as one of the great ambitions of what the time that's left to me, to go out sober. It's now 24, 25 years since I've had a drink, and I've never regretted a day of being sober.
One of the great things about the book is the sort of difficult truths that you face in the book, and that you don't come up with sort of easy or soft images all the time. It's not as though you're a recovered alcoholic. You don't talk like that. You don't think like that. But there is, I think, a difficult truth in the book, something that you do, I think, have come through, which is the idea of your own introspection, of that you're not a gregarious person. It's something I think you've really come to terms with, and that I think the book benefits enormously from that sense of yourself that you have of, actually, after all the years, I have stopped feeling guilty that I don't have big parties for all my witty friends, that I actually have very few friends, and that you actually have come to terms with that. It's actually become a sort of gift. And it certainly appears in the pages of the book as something that I think really matters to you now.
Yes, thank you, Colm. That's very true. I mean, for a long time, I was conflicted about being an introvert. I wanted to be the guy who set the table on a roar, and I mean, parties terrified me. There was a cartoon in the New Yorker many years ago of a man going into a party with all these people in tuxedos and women with cocktail dresses and drinks, and there's a bubble coming out of the man's head saying, "Uh-oh, grown-ups." And that's kind of the way I felt. Um, um, I thought that to be an extrovert, to be witty, to be the center of attention, to have loads of friends, to have brunches and all those things that I was never really truly able to do. Here's the contradictory thing, though. If I was at a dinner party, people have often said to me, "Geez, you're much lighter in reality than you are." It's always, I think, Christ, am I like Hamlet walking around the battlements with no great speeches? Just walking from room to room, being this dour, black cloaked figure. But actually, if I'm at a dinner party and I'll still feel uneasy, um, I can be, dare I say it, I can be funny and interesting. And I just happen to believe that the things worth considering in life are the things that I've written about. On the other hand, I'd love to be a guy who was just light and funny and witty all the time. But I met Spike Milligan briefly before he died. He was a brilliant British comedian, and we were talking about his hilariously, you know, detailed events of his life. And he said, "You've no idea who the real me is." He said, "I suffer dreadfully from doubt and depression and so forth. And most of the time," he said, "I'm locked in my room." And he said, "There's far, far more people than you realize who are like that than who are the other way. So don't make the judgment about me standing in front of a microphone. That's one part of me. And the other part of me um, is the part that's terribly uncertain." And when I heard him say that, I thought to myself, wow, that's kind of the difference between an introvert and an extrovert. And it's okay to be an introvert and it's okay to be an extrovert. And you can be a combination of the two, which I am. If I can go out on the stage on Broadway or I can walk down the red carpet in Hollywood, that's the bit of me that is the extrovert bit. I remember walking down a red carpet and you walk down, there's microphones from all over the place, all over the world, and they're asking you these daft questions. Um, like, let's say you're doing a movie about, I don't know, I'm just making something up, you're an earthquake, and they'll say to you, "What do you think about? Have you ever been in?" And Robin Williams was standing behind me, and he was waiting his turn to go in front of the microphone. And I always remember he leaned over me and said, "Isn't this a kind of hell?" And then I moved on and I looked back, and he was on fire, and I could see all the journalists all falling around the place laughing. And I always thought of that contradiction in that moment where he said to me, "It's hell," and then his moment of electrifying the press with humor. But Robin Williams was like Spike Milligan. He was that contradiction between the private, tortured self. And yes, they were two brilliant comedians, but I think that we all, to a great extent, can understand that contradiction, the need to be alone and the need to be with other people, not just the sense of wanting to be the center of attention, but to be the Yorick of the situation, you know.
Um,
But as in Hamlet,
um,
I mean, sorry, go ahead, Tom.
one of the rewarding things about reading the book is just the intensity with which you examine yourself and the way in which you remember things and the way in which you write about your own life. In Ireland, as you know, if you told someone you're writing your memoirs, it could sound like a threat. In other words, everyone who'd ever known you could suddenly think, oh my God, he's going to tell about, and it's going to, like the bitter word would be a great title for such a book. And it seems to me that you both instinctively and strategically, you made a decision that a lot of people who have been very close to you were simply not going to be in your book, that you're going to spare them your thoughts on them. And you know, as I reviewed the book and I love the book, I think your picture of your parents is really new in Ireland. Just to say they were ordinary people and they loved me and I loved them in return, and there is nothing to be bitter about. But also, I think you made a decision about your later life, that there were people you weren't going to write about. You weren't going to write about your marriage. You weren't going to. You mentioned your children. I noticed. I mean, I used to work with your brother, Donald, and you don't write about your siblings, for example. So as a result of that, you get a certain sort of book which I think is unsparing of yourself. I think it examines yourself very closely, and it's also funny in many ways. There's some very good jokes in the book. But I just wonder if you could talk to us about that idea of making a decision as you write a memoir, who you're going to leave out or what you're not going to say.
Well, I don't know if you remember a woman some years ago called Julia Phillips. She was a producer in Hollywood. She produced The Sting and Butch Cassidy and quite a few huge blockbusters at that time. And she wrote a book called You'll Never Eat Lunch in This Town Again. In which she did exactly that. She named all the people that she'd ever worked with, and she wrote all the stories about them and so forth. And consequently, she never did work in Hollywood again because she was kind of blacklisted. The book is called Walking with Ghosts, and there's very, very few people mentioned in it who are alive. And I kept that very much in my mind. Because the memoir is about me, I don't in a way have the right to go into anybody who's living and say, this is what I think, and remember that moment when you did this or said that. So I stayed away from that, and I was always conscious of, it's not because I was afraid to do it. I just didn't think that it was relevant to the story I was trying to tell.
There's I think for all of us who were educated by the Christian Brothers in Ireland, I mean, I remember going home one day and asking, what's an imbecile? He had a new word for me, and you're talking about the way in which, you're constantly undermined as you'll never come to anything. And I think there is that moment in the book where, I think you talk about, it's just an opening sense of a chapter where you talk about Leonardo DiCaprio and you being brought by Versace, but just before that, your mother has been describing to an audience, I think, to sort of make them laugh about you. But I think, did you still sometime, as you're walking along the street in New York, or as you're about to start, or you're on a red carpet, do you see that distance that you come, that something that could never have been imagined in the past when you were growing up, that you could actually be on film, write a memoir, be recognized on the street?
It really is something that I, to this day, I cannot comprehend. I didn't even know somebody like me could become an actor. Acting or anything creative was unimaginable. I had seen Brendan Behan on a bus when I was a child. That was the nearest I ever came to any kind of notoriety. The idea that one day I would be on film, I could not make sense of that. I used to see 10 or 15 films a week, and it was films and religion were things that my imagination could escape to. But just like heaven was inaccessible, movies were also in the same way. um, I I have no answer to that. I don't know why I walked out on that altar. I don't know why I became an actor. And I think I tried to describe in the book one day standing on a hill in Denmark. We were doing Hamlet. And I looked up at the sky and I saw these birds going across the sky. And I said to a friend of mine, what impels those birds to be motoring across the sky at that speed with such purpose? And I thought that's kind of the way I was. I don't know, like, I'm a bit like Columbus, you know, where they said about him when he set out, he didn't know where he was going. When he got there, he didn't know where he was. And when he came back, he didn't know where he'd been. Though that journey was filled with moment, there's a sense of that. I have no idea, really, truly, how I got here because I'm not ambitious by nature at all. I don't network. I've never asked anybody for a job. Um, so um, yeah, so it's a surprise to me that I'm here. There are more.
Just
Sorry,
to
go
go
ahead.
back, just as a very last question, just to go circle around to the beginning again, is it possible that the early Catholicism has never really left you, in that level of, you're talking about, of introspection, of conscience, of guilt about things, of wondering what things mean, of approaching everything in a way from a position of that we're all sort of fallen, or we're all guilty, and attempting to come out into the light, but after a very difficult journey, that a lot of those things that emerge from Catholicism actually inform your book, and even the way you're talking, but even the way you perform?
Yes, you could be absolutely right about that. I mean, the Jesuits famously said, "Give us a boy till he's 7 years of age, and he's ours for life." And I used to think that was a kind of a joke, but it's very, very true. The most useless emotion that you can carry around on your back is guilt. It is a dreadful, thing to impose on a young person. Um, I think you could be absolutely right, Colm. I wonder, do any of us really escape from our earliest encounters with authority figures or parents? Um, I certainly don't find any comfort in religion in the way that I did as a child, but I find comfort in the acceptance of life the way it is. And weirdly enough, I woke up last night around 3 o'clock. You know, when the demons start banging the doors of the wardrobe, wanting to get out, and you know, and I thought to myself, wow, this really is a kind of gift that I'm here, a gift, a real gift that I can make the day. I can make the day long. I think it was Seneca who said, you know, life is short, but the days are long if you want to make them long. You know, so I'm trying to make the days long is what I'm going to. And John McGahern said his ambition, the great Irish novelist, he said that what content is for him is the peaceful passing of day into day, and I think that's a great ambition to have.
Gabriel, thank you very much. Can we go back? Do we have questions from the audience?
Yes, we do. Thank you very much, Colm. Terrific conversation. Obviously, most of the people asking questions haven't read the book, so we'll go through a few of those. There's several questions about the process of writing the memoir. Had you taken notes over a period of time, or did you just sort of set your mind to sit down and do this? A few questions about that.
I'm not, I didn't regard myself as a writer. I just thought I'm going to, like, if I'm sitting in a cafe and I have a pen, I'll jot down a few things. And it's kind of like a chain thing. And that led to that. And so forth. I've read very, very few memoirs, to be honest. I read more novels than anything else. I stumbled through it, and by wishing to connect events and see the causes and roots of them, that dictated the structure.
You brought up authors, and we have a question about authors. Is there a book or an author that you keep finding yourself coming back to and either rereading a specific book or rereading a specific author?
Yeah, many, too many to actually to list with leaving somebody out. But what I admire, I think, is simplicity and clarity. I like that, and I love discovering writers that embrace that style. I've just discovered Ken Taruf, who's an American novelist, who's passed away. He wrote a beautiful novel called Plain Song, and Our Souls at Night. Raymond Carver, Hemingway, Alan Sillitoe. People who made me feel like, oh my God, that's the way I feel. I find this language accessible. I know what they're talking about. But I read very widely, and I couldn't even begin to make that list.
It's a related question, but this time it has to do with, are there any roles that you've played that you keep thinking about or coming back to or rethinking that maybe you could have done something differently about?
Every one of them. I'm still thinking about a play I did at the Dublin Shakespeare Society, which is my second play, which is called Rosencrantz and Guildenstern Are Dead. I played Rosencrantz in it. And I still think, God damn it, I wish I had done that. And I think that's common to so many actors, that you think, I wish I had done that. The part belongs to you for a little bit, and then you have to let it go. I mean, you can't go around saying you own Hamlet and that nobody else can play it. There are some parts I really loved that I was very, very happy with, but other people didn't see it in that way. So I don't really know. I have to take the satisfaction that I've had in the preparation, in the doing of the thing, and the result you have to let go.
A question about the choice of characters you've played, or scripts or movies you've been drawn to. What do you consider when you're looking at a script or a movie that you're thinking about? And the second part of that question is that the same for the stage versus the screen?
It's always about what the script is about, and I will always look at the script to see, what is this saying? What is this script saying about the world that I want to be part of, putting out there? And there's a lot of things that might be they might be good scripts, but what they're about is not something that I would agree with. And so I've made choices to a great extent based on that. And I've made choices that, I maybe shouldn't have made. I had to sit in an audience once and watch an actor accept an Academy Award for a role that I turned down. But that's life. It's the way it is. I have always gone for the script and the director. It's always been about that.
Final question, any musical influences in your life?
I suppose, well, again, it's a bit like a list of authors, isn't it, really? So many, so many. The first time, and still to this day, what the Beatles are talking about, even though I only understood the melodies at the time. But when you actually go back and you look at what they were actually saying, that a song like Help, I need somebody, not just anybody. Won't you please help me? Well, what an amazing thing that was at 22 and 23, whatever they were channeling, however they did it, I don't know. But I just finished a movie based on the music of Leonard Cohen, in which I play a poet who's going in search of lost love. And Leonard Cohen was somebody that I've always responded to, and to get the opportunity to play a version of him in Montreal where he's revered. That was a very satisfying film experience, and a great opportunity to be in his world, to be in the world of his lyrics.
Well, thank you very much. Thanks, everybody, for joining us. Thanks, Colm, for chatting with Gabriel.
Thank you, Gabriel.
Gabriel's memoir is Walking with Ghosts, and you can purchase a copy with a signed book plate in the link below, and the book is available wherever books are sold.